Hosea chapter 7. When I would have healed Israel, then the iniquity of Ephraim was discovered, and the wickedness of Samaria, for they commit falsehood, and the thief cometh in, and the troop of robbers spoil us without. And they consider not their hearts that I remember all their wickedness, now their own doings have beset them about, they are before my face. They make the king glad with their wickedness, and the princes with their lies. They are all adulterers, as an oven heated by the baker, who ceaseth from raising after he hath kneaded the dough, until it be leavened. In the day of our king, the princes have made him sick with bottles of wine. He stretched out his hand with scorners. For they have made ready their heart like an oven. While they lie in wait, their baker sleepeth all the night. In the morning it burneth as a flaming fire. They are all hot as an oven, and have devoured their judges. All their kings are fallen. There's none among them that calleth unto me. Ephraim, he hath mixed himself among the people. Ephraim is a cake not turned. Strangers have devoured his strength, and he knoweth not. Yet gray hairs are here, and there upon him, yet he knoweth not. And the pride of Israel testifieth to his face. They do not return to the Lord their God, nor seek him for all this. Ephraim also is like a silly dove without heart. They call to Egypt. They go to Assyria. When shall they go? I will spread my net upon them. I will bring them down as the fowls of the heaven. I will chastise them as their congregation hath heard. Woe unto them, for they have fled from me. Destruction unto them, because they have transgressed against me. Though I have redeemed them, yet they have spoken lies against me. They have not cried unto me with their heart. When they howled upon their beds, they assembled themselves for corn and wine, and they rebel against me. Though I have bound and strengthened their arms, yet do they imagine mischief against me. They return not to the Most High. They are like a deceitful bow. Their princes shall fall by the sword for the rage of their tongue. This shall be their derision in the land of Egypt. Now here in chapter 7, Hosea loads us down with a lot of figures of speech, which we'll try and take the time to discern. And this figure on the oven, actually he's got two or three things going there. He's got two or three things going there that are using the oven and baking, but they're talking about different things. So we'll have to sort through that. Verse 1 of chapter 7 harkens back to those first three verses in chapter 6, which we decided was the admonition of the prophet for the nation to turn. God would heal them. We put chapter 6 in a messianic context, looking for the ultimate healing. And so here he says in chapter 7, when I would have healed them, if they had turned back to me, if they had repented, I would have healed them. I would have restored them. But they have not. They have been rebellious. And then we're going to see a little later when he's going to tie this in with the latter part of the chapter. But God was willing to take them, but they were not willing to repent. I would have healed Israel. Then the iniquity of Ephraim was discovered, and the wickedness of Samaria. For they commit falsehood, and the thief cometh in, and the troop of robbers spoileth without. Now you remember when we studied Jonah there in 2 Kings 14, talking about Jeroboam coming to the throne. He was a descendant of Jehu, but God brought him to the throne and was going to use him to deliver the northern kingdom. He wasn't going to completely destroy the northern kingdom. They were still in covenant relationship with him as far as God's part is concerned. He made a promise to them that they would be his people. And so he's trying to restore that relationship. And so he doesn't want to completely destroy them. And so he sends them Jonah, and he raises up Jeroboam, who's not a good king, but he did destroy, Jehu had destroyed the Baal, but Jeroboam continued to practice the calf worship. And so even though there were some reforms in the north, they did not go back as far as God wanted them to. And Jeroboam, he retained that worship because it was to his advantage to keep the people in check or under his power. So they commit falsehood. There's a lie in their right hand. They have that idol. That's the falsehood he's talking about. And the thief cometh in, and the troop of robbers spoil us without. And there you have an interesting figure of destruction from within and destruction from without. The thief breaketh in. Well, the thief, Jesus uses that to describe the false shepherds and the hirelings and so on and so forth that destroy the flock of God's people. And so here the same idea is the thief breaks in. They should have been watching. They should have been prepared. But now they've got these corrupting elements from inside their house. Okay? And then he says, a troop of robbers spoileth without. So they've got within the stealthy thief. They've got without these bands of robbers. And so they're being destroyed from within and without. And they consider not in their hearts that I remember all their wickedness. Now their own doings have beset them about. They are before my face. There is the key text in this chapter. That's the practical verse that you want to keep in your mind. They do not consider that God knows or remembers all their wickedness. Remember what Jesus said in Matthew 12, I think it's verse 36. Every idle word is going to be brought up at the judgment. That scares me to death. The things that I've said and not even paying attention to what I was saying, let alone the things I know that I said I shouldn't have said. But every idle word, God's going to remember it all. And the only thing that's going to save us at that day is the grace of God and the blood of Jesus Christ. But that doesn't mean we can lie. It doesn't mean we can profane the Lord's name. It doesn't mean we can be the kind of person who is using loose speech. And so, but just think the words, and James talks about the man who's able to bridle his tongue can bridle his whole body. So we need to be working on that tongue because it's going to help us bridle everything else. But here, this is the point. Israel doesn't realize I'm going to remember everything. He'd said earlier over there, he says, I'm not going to forget one thing. I'm going to remember all of this. I'm not going to let it pass. Amos said for 3 transgressions and for 4. Their cup was full. All right? So you do not want to go to the Lord like that. But that's how Israel is before. And so because of that, they were going to meet their God. They were going to be destroyed. But then notice there the second part of that verse. Now their own doings have beset them about. They are before my face. All right, God knows what they've done. And God has allowed them to do what they wanted to do. That's the thing a lot of people don't get. Is they think, well, because I'm doing these things, I'm getting away with it. No, just because you're doing it doesn't mean you're getting away with it. God sees, you see. That's the only thing that restrains some people is the fact that they believe they're accountable to God. They have a fear of God. But a lot of people have no fear of God. They think God doesn't see. That's what the old Jews had said. Look at how many times in the book of Psalms and Proverbs and the prophets as well, that God doesn't see or God doesn't care. No, he cares, he sees, and he's going to remember all of it. But he says here, they are beset by their own doings. I think I said this last Sunday in the sermon. I know I've said it recently. You're free to do whatever you want to do, but you are not free to choose the consequences. You can choose to do whatever you want. You want to lie, you want to steal, you want to cheat, you want to be an adulterer, fornicator, drunkard, go right ahead. Nobody's going to stop you. But you are going to pay the consequences for all those choices. Now, some people think, well, I got away with that. Nothing happened to me. Well, the judgment is going to come along. So you're not ultimately going to get away with it. But a lot of people, they live their life without any regard to God, without any regard to his law. And then they're sitting in a pile of ashes, scratching themselves with a piece of pottery and moaning and wailing like Job. Well, why did this happen to me? Well, I can tell you why it happened to you. You didn't listen to God. You chose to do your own thing. So we're not free of the consequences. And just because some people may escape some of the consequences of their sins, they ultimately are going to stand in judgment before God. The man who's suffering in the consequences of his sins ought to thank God that he's got something to cause him to reflect on his behavior, and maybe he'll repent. You won't necessarily escape the consequences of your choices because you repent, but you can be saved. You can be saved. And that was the thing here with Israel and Judah both. God said, I still want to save you, but you're going to face the consequences of your actions now. I'm going to take you off the land. I've got to. And so that's what they're facing here. Verse 3 says, they make the king glad with their wickedness and the princes with their lies. If you remember back there in 2 Kings 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, along in there, anyway, in the reign of Ahab, and then how Jehu is anointed king, he was one of Ahab's generals. And the thing is the prophet that Elisha sent to him anointed him to be king. And he came to him and said, I want to talk to you privately. And they went off in private. And he told him, God anoints you to be king over Israel. And Jehu's just amazed. And all his buddies are out there. His commanders and other generals are all out there. And they're just having a big drunken party. And they said, well, what'd that fellow want? We know he's a prophet. Whatever he said was a lie. And then Jehu said, I'm going to be king over Israel. And boy, they all jumped up and applauded and said, yeah, that's great. Let's make him king over Israel. And so there in their drunken stupor, they made him king. And then they exercised a coup and they killed Ahab and Jezebel. And so a new dynasty of kings was put in. And from that point on, it'd been pretty bloody in the north. But from the time of Ahab on, just one king after another being overthrown by violence. And so what the prophet here is saying, and here's again a very another practical thing. Isaiah 5 talks about it as well when he talks about the priest err through wine. But the evil effects of alcohol on a society. I mean, it's not water that makes that windmill in Washington run. You think, well, a windmill pumps water, and I drink a lot of water, and Brother Pound said one time, look at that. That's the first time I ever saw a windmill run on water. Well, they don't run on water, they run on wind. But it's generating wind, and that's how I'm using that to refer to Washington. But it's not water that they're pumping. It's the corruption, it's the drunkenness, it's all of that is what makes that work up there. And the evil effects of alcohol on our society, is just overwhelming. People are not sober-minded. So they get behind the wheel and they kill somebody. Or they get drunk and mad and they go beat up their wife. Yeah, you've had enough of that in your life you can get up here and preach a whole sermon on it. You know how it is. You've seen that. You know how evil that is. And yet people do not learn. And I listened to a fellow one time, he was a chemist talking about alcohol. He said, if we had discovered distilled liquor in the laboratory rather than in somebody's backyard in a still, said we would have regulated that as a dangerous substance. But once men started drinking, I mean, we're all against marijuana, and I'm not saying I'm for it. We're all against marijuana, we're all against this. But the biggest drug problem we have in the United States today is alcohol. That's what's killing people. Alcohol sickness, alcohol-related deaths, alcohol-related spousal abuse problems and child abuse problems, alcohol-related corruption in government and in business. And, that's the one thing I admired about Trump. Wasn't a lot of things I admired about his character, but he didn't drink. Because he knew he had to be clear-minded if he was going to make the kind of money he made as a businessman. He never drank. He understood. And yet a lot of people don't. And and they use alcohol to get their deals. I deal in real estate, and one of our ethical standards is specifically stated, I cannot sign a contract with someone if I know they're under the influence of alcohol. That's an ethical violation. And so we understand that. And so here's what's going on. They are all adulterers, and I think they're talking about their spiritual adultery, their idolatry, but they were committing adultery. We've already seen that in Amos. They were committing adultery in being spiritual adulterers. Now here's this oven. So the oven heated by the baker who ceases from raising to stir the fire, some of the versions say, and that's the idea. Fella gets you got a fire, and if you want your oven to be hot in the morning, we'll see that here in just a minute. You stir that fire up and you keep it going, and you put wood on it so it'll be good and hot in the morning. But if you're just wanting to raise a loaf of bread or several loaves of bread you've got over here in a bowl or whatever, you Mom always used to just set, this is when you had a pilot light on the oven. She just set it either up on the top where the pilot light was on top, or she set it down by the side on the floor where the pilot light was on in the broiler. And so that was enough heat to get that to rise. And so that's what he's saying. You just set it over there close to the oven. You don't stir it up because you don't want a lot of heat. You just want that to leaven. You want it to rise. And so they're all adulterers. And they're as an oven heated by the baker after he hath kneaded until it be leavened. In other words, they are thoroughly, fully corrupt. That's what he's saying. Then he goes on and says, in the day of our king, the princes have made him sick with bottles of wine. He stretched out his hand with scorners, and so there's that evidence of their corruption. And they have made ready their heart like an oven. While they lie in wait, their baker sleepeth all the night, and in the morning it burneth as a flaming fire. And so he stoked it at night, he got it up, built a big fire in there. That thing is just a big hot bed of coals in there. It's ready for something to come in and be baked. And he says Israel's like that. So the first figure is they're thoroughly corrupt. And then the second figure is they are an oven that's ready to receive whatever is going to be baked or cooked. And it's stoking hot. It's ready to take it. So in one figure, they're getting corrupted. And then in the other figure, they are that corrupt. And the corruption is related back to the princes that made themselves sick with bottles of wine and so forth. In other words, you've got the oven and you've got the princes. When you have a righteous nation, they're going to throw out the bad guys. But if you've got people who are corrupt, they're going to do everything they can to have leaders who are corrupt. And the leaders who are corrupt are going to do everything they can to sustain corruption. It's a vicious cycle. There's no desire to get rid of corruption in society and in government in particular, because those two things promote one another. And so here are these corrupt kings, and they're like this loaf or whatever is going to be cooked in the oven, and boy, they're ready for it. They're going to cook it up. They're going to make sure that it's done. And so they're evil. And they're consuming their kings and so forth. So their heart is ready like an oven. You see, they're ready for whatever the bakers or the princes are going to give them. So they're ready to receive it. And he's ready to deliver it. He keeps it stirred up. He keeps the fire going. So they're all as hot as an oven and have devoured their judges. All their kings are fallen. There's none among them that cometh unto me. They've devoured their judges. The judges are the ones who render judgment according to the law. We just recently had a situation over in Texas. This was what Nell and Nora were describing to me last night. That's what that was. And where they had a fellow who was pulling off a scam that involved aerobic systems. Well, if you know anything, every state has rules like this. You have to have a rule, and you've got an application, and you've got a license to get it, and all that has to get approved, and then those things are installed. Well, this guy is installing septic systems and getting away with it. And the only way that a fellow could do that is that there's corruption elsewhere in the system, see. And we've had similar things. I remember when I lived up in Ouachita County in Arkansas, all kinds of corruption where you had the judges who were promoting that. So if you've got a guy I tried to help a fellow get elected judge one time, and I stand there talking to him, and the fellow said, well, I can't vote for you. And he said, well, why not? I said, because you're too honest. They don't want an honest judge. They don't want anybody that's going to follow the law, see. And they're hollering about this over in Texas. This is what I was thinking about, where we have a road system where the county judges and all of the commissioners are responsible for that. They got their own little fiefdom down there, little principality that they're over. And somebody was complaining about down at Lufkin. They've got him up on charges where there are literally hundreds of thousands of dollars that are missing that the county's been charged for asphalt. They can't find road one that the old boys paid. But he'd been getting away with it, you see. So that's what this is talking about. It's talking about corruption, talking about judges who are corrupt, talking about people who are corrupt. And if they're not willing to go along, then they burn them up. So Ephraim, verse 8, still another figure here. Ephraim hath mixed himself among the people. Ephraim is a cake not turned. So here's a batter, and this is an unleavened cake. And they whip this up. He's all mixed up with the nations. So all that corruption from the nations is in this batter that's being described. And so you pour that out for a flatbread on a clay stone. You've heard of stone baked bread, and you can pour out a cake on it. This is what the Jews would do. They just pour out a cake, kind of like a pancake or a piece of cornbread that you're going to fry in the skillet. And when do you turn it over? You men even know this. You're supposed to turn your pancake over when it's all bubbly on top. That's right. And so is that when you want to get it out on your plate and eat it? Oh, it's not fit to eat. And nothing worse than an undone pancake. And see, that's what he's saying here. He says they're a cake not turned. So here they are burned on one side, raw on the other side. They're fit for nothing. See? And so God looks at that and says they're a cake unturned. They're disgusting. They're fit for nothing because of the way they've behaved. Now, verse 9, strangers have devoured his strength, and he knoweth it not. Yea, gray hairs are here and there upon him, yet he knows it not. Well, unfortunately, we have mirrors at my house, and so I know I got gray hair. I don't know when it happened. I just walked in the bathroom one morning, looked in the mirror, and there he was, this old white-headed man standing in front of the mirror. I don't know how that happened, but it did. But here, he said he covered up with gray hair, and he doesn't know it. He doesn't know he's an old man. His strength is devoured. Strangers have devoured his strength. So there's what's happened. Getting in league with these idolatrous nations, whether it was the Syrians or the Assyrians or the Edomites, the Canaanites, whatever, the Tyrians, they were the ones who introduced the Baal because of Jezebel. And so here the strangers have devoured their strength. Their strength was their faith in God, their spirituality. It says that's gone. And so what is he? Well, he's got gray hairs all over him. He doesn't know it. He doesn't know he's a poor old broken down man. And, that's a sad reality when you wake up one morning and you are faced with the reality that you're old. And so, of course, Mama used to encourage me. She said, son, you're not old. Of course, she was 97. And so it's all relative, But you when you realize that, it's kind of disheartening. But Israel didn't even know how bad off they were. And the pride of Israel, that's Jehovah, testifieth to his face. We've looked at this before back in Amos, I think it's chapter 6, when the pride of Israel, and one time it's used of their idolatry, then another time it's used of Jehovah. That's in chapter 8, I believe. Here, though, I think it's Jehovah because it starts out with Jehovah. It says, I would have healed them. The pride of Israel testifies or bears witness. How did he do that? He sent them prophets. He sent them Hosea. He sent them Elijah, Elisha, Jonah, Oded, Hananiah, all these different prophets. And they had not heeded that. They do not return to the Lord their God, nor seek him for all this. So this, he back there in chapter 5, wasn't it? Or is it chapter 6? Verse 6, chapter 6, verse 5. I have hewed them by the prophets. This is what he's talking about. I sent them prophets. I sent them revelation. I sent them admonition. I sent them plagues and pestilence and armies and everything in the world against them. And then I turned around and I delivered them so they know that I was still looking after them. Oh, Ahab gets in league with Jehoshaphat down in the south and the king of Edom, and they go out to fight the Edomites. They're at the end of 1 Kings. And Elijah goes out to meet him, and he says, if it weren't for the fact that the king of Judah is here, I wouldn't even mess with you fellas. So that was a pretty good slap in the face. And Ahab says, well, God's called us to go up and fight the Moabites. He says, no, that's not what he's called you to do. He says, what he's called you to do is go out there in the valley, Jezreel, and dig ditches and water your horses and rest and get up in the hills and watch. That's what he's called you to do. And the next day they get up, and if you remember the miracle, they look down and all those ditches that God miraculously filled with water without rain look like blood on the field down there. And so when the Moabites come in, they are slaughtered. They turn on themselves. And Edom and Moab and Judah just sit up there and watch. And so God delivered them from the Moabites. And so this is the kind of thing he's talking about. But they still don't seek me. They don't seek me. Now he changes figures. Ephraim is also like a silly dove without heart. They call to Egypt. They go to Assyria. I never was a big dove hunter. I did do a little of it. I liked to hunt quail better. That's what our family did. And quail and dove are altogether different. Quail, you go out and you walk them up and you bust them up, and they go to the ground and then they cover you up and hide. Dove, he gets up and he'll go off over here and he gets started and he'll come back over here and they're hard to hit, at least they were for me because I'm not that good a shot, but they don't act the same way. And then here he's not talking about hunting them with a shotgun. He's talking about a fowler's net or a snare on the ground, one or the other. And with the case of the fowler's net, he's hidden down below, and when the birds are kicked up, or that bird gets up, then he throws the net into the air and catches him, which is a very difficult thing. Or they set these snares, which are hidden, and the birds go into them. But even he's talking about flight, I think he's talking about the birds getting up, and they're silly in that they go here and they go there instead of covering up and finding a place to hide. And so, where do they go? They go to Egypt, they go to Assyria. And during the reign of Hosea, Hosea had been paying tribute annually. This is the last king of the northern kingdom. He'd been paying tribute annually to Assyria. But the Assyrians and the Syrians made a league against the Israelites. And so he reads the handwriting on the wall. He can't pay as much as the Syrians pay. And so the Syrians have paid them so that they can come down there and take over the northern kingdom. And so Hosea sends a bribe or a tribute down to the king of Egypt, to Pharaoh. And he's relying on Pharaoh to come up and deliver the northern kingdom when the Assyrians come in, and Pharaoh doesn't come. And so that's what he's talking about, this treachery in the heart of the king of Israel in seeking these alliances with these nations. But they should have been turning to God, you see. And so he says in verse 12, when they shall go, I will spread my net upon them. Earlier he talked about they're going to get caught in their own devices, you see. Well, their idolatry's taken them down, their lack of faithfulness. Years later when Zedekiah. Years later when Zedekiah makes a league with Babylon, he swore an oath before God that he would honor. Nebuchadnezzar made him take an oath to God. He swore an oath before God that he would be loyal to the king of Babylon. And then he turned around and he tried to make a deal with Egypt. And God said, you swore an oath, and I'm going to make you keep it. And because you've been unfaithful, so the king of Babylon is going to come. He's going to carry you off captive, and you'll not see the land to where you go. And what happened was the last thing he saw was his sons killed, and then the king of Babylon put out his eyes, and he went into Babylonian captivity as a blind man and died there. But so God says here, I'm going to spread my net upon them. In other words, this is going to be a trap for them. They think they're going to get around what I want done because I want to carry them into captivity. And they're going to try and get around that. Says what they're going to find out, that's going to be the thing that brings them down. And so I will bring them down as the fowls of the heaven, that throwing up that net and catching them. I will chastise them as their congregation hath heard. See, and that goes back to the verse above when God says, I have testified to their face. The prophets, you see. They've heard this. I've told them that this is going to happen, and yet they still do this kind of thing. Have you ever known anybody like that? You warn them, you tell them, this is what's going to happen, and they go on and do it, and then it's what happens, and who are they mad at? You. They're mad at you because exactly what you told them was going to happen is happening. And that's what the deal is here with Israel. I told you, I warned you, now it's happening, and you still won't straighten up and fly right. No pun intended on the dove. So, 13. Woe unto them, for they have fled from me, destruction unto them, because they have transgressed against me. They fled from him in that they went to the idols, in that they went to the nations. You see, they should have been trusting in Jehovah, but they're trusting in all these other things. And so they're running away from God, and in their running, they're transgressing. See, they're sinning because of their idolatry, because of their faithlessness, because of their corruption. And then they have spoken lies against me. This is all God's fault. See, but it's all said and done, and all of this fails. Jeremiah talks about this with regard, it's Ezekiel, talks about this with regard to the children of Judah when they are carried into Babylonian captivity. They said the fathers have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. And Ezekiel says, you're not going to use that proverb anymore. Because your fathers, they did eat sour grapes, and they were wicked, but you've got them beat bad. Your teeth are set on edge because of your own sour grapes. And says, you're not going to say this anymore, and you're not going to say anything evil against the God of Israel who brought you into captivity. I said, that's the way they do. If a fellow gets taken in his sin and it comes back on him and he has bad consequences, well, then it's God's fault, or it's the church's fault, or it's the elder's fault, or it's the preacher's fault, whatever. No, it's your fault. And we tried to tell you, and we want to help you, but we cannot overpower the consequences of the choices that you make, you see. And that's, if there was ever a lesson that people need to learn in life today, that's it. And one reason nobody believes that's true, they think they ought to be absolved of their consequences of their actions, is because, well, that's what you think about it. You think it's wrong. I don't think it's wrong. It's all relativism. Well, that might work on a few things. And if we're talking about moral absolutes, you might be able to argue that. But now if you're talking, what if you jump off a building and you break your neck? And there are some things that just happen because that's the way the world works. And so we might can argue about some things as to whether or not they're right or they're wrong, but the reality is that some things have consequences because that's just the way it is. Other things have consequences because that's the way it should be. And so murderers ought to go to the electric chair and so forth, you see. And but people don't believe that. I should have my truth and you have your truth and everybody go along and do what they want to do. And that, my friends, is the reality of no truth. And so up is down and left is right and black is white and good is evil, you see. But God says there in verse 14, they have not cried unto me with their heart. They've cried, but they hadn't cried unto me with their heart, you see. They will not repent. Go back over there to verse 1. They continue to commit falsehood. See, they've cried, but not with their heart. When they howled upon their beds, they assembled themselves for corn and wine, and they rebel against me. So here they are. God is starting to bring in these troubles. Their government is crumbling. They're being severely taxed. They have enemies from without that are severely oppressing them. They have all these plagues and the results of that. There's crop failure. This may be a description of ultimately what happens when Samaria is besieged for 3 years. And so they're crying out for corn and wine, but they continue to rebel against God. See? So he completely destroys the city. says, I have bound, and some versions there say taught, or some say disciplined. I think the reason for choosing the word bound is the idea of binding on armor or a sheath. You know, how you use a sheath when you shoot a bow, and then sometimes you've seen them use sheaths on their arms when they practice for sword play and so forth. And so that's the idea. I have bound, or I've taught, and that's the literal idea, and strengthened their arms. In other words, they've been trained. They've been disciplined. That's the idea. That's the figure. I've disciplined them. I've taught them. I've trained them. Yet they do imagine mischief against me. They just keep on doing it the way they've been doing it. They've been taught. Have you ever done that? You ever take your son or your daughter and you show them how to do something, give them instructions in it, and then, yeah, I got it, Daddy. And then they go right back the next time and do it wrong, you know. And that's so kid-like. And eventually, hopefully, they get it. But that's what he's describing here. Here are people who've been taught, but they just will not do the right thing. They will not do what they've been taught. They return, but not to the Most High. They're like a deceitful bow. And then there's another figure. My son-in-law is an archer, and his father was an archer. And they shot a lot of different bows, but they finally got to shooting the long bows, which are more like the traditional archery. And if you don't take care of those things like you ought to, well, they can get warped or twisted and get out of shape. If they're properly cared for, that doesn't happen. But this deceitful bow, here's this bow, and it's drawn, it's loaded, it's got the arrow, and it's drawn, and that thing is either warped or it's weakened, and you pull it back enough, and it may break, or it won't shoot true. And that's what's being described here. And here's a fellow who's in a life or death situation. He's shooting, and his arrow's not going where it's supposed to go. And so they are deceitful bows. I can't rely on them. They can't be trusted. So their princes shall fall by the sword for the rage of their tongue. What do you do with a bow like that? You can't fix it. You throw it away. And so that's what he's saying. You're a deceitful bow. You're no use to me. And so judgment. That's it. Their princes shall fall by the sword for the rage of their tongue. Again, they're speaking evil against God. They're blaming him. They're complaining against him. Rather, they ought to be confessing their sins of idolatry. This shall be their derision in the land of Egypt. In other words, that league they made with the king of Egypt, this is what's going to put them to shame. The fact that they will not turn to me, they will not repent, they will not rely upon the true God. They're going to go down here to Egypt. They've been relying on Assyria. That didn't work out. So instead of coming to me, they're going to go down here to Egypt. And they're going to be put to shame because of that. Now Hezekiah, he had paid off the Assyrians. This is about the same time. Hezekiah pays off the Assyrians the first time, but the second time he doesn't do that, and God delivers. And that's the story of Sennacherib and the 185,000 that were slain by the destroyer.